There was a poll started by a journalist asking people, hey, between journalists and gamers, who are the most insufferable and inherently loathsome individuals? The people on the internet rejoiced to answer, hey, at least gamers know some sense of humor, at least gamers know where to put their personal space. And this article, I think, highlights my points exactly. This is an article from Rock Paper Shotgun talking about the Final Fantasy XIV event called Final Fantasy XIV Fan Festival. If it has one more word starting with F, it would be inappropriate. This is a place where you got tons of things related to Final Fantasy XIV, like new in-game content announcements, cosplays, etc. A journalist decided to come in and share his take on the weirdness of the situation in an incredibly disrespectful and condescending way. How? Well, let me show you. Before we go on even further, I just want to say that I'm not a fan of Final Fantasy XIV. The last Final Fantasy XIV I remember was the game that everyone thought was absolute garbage. But it's not garbage anymore apparently, and people are attending festivals of it. How can you ruin this happy, wholesome, and peaceful event by having someone who didn't disclose himself as a journalist to go around asking people, hey, isn't what you're doing a little weird? And we didn't need to go too far to the article to see the condescension that he has towards the fandom, which even I, as someone who didn't play Final Fantasy XIV, find absolutely disgusting.
I'm a Namazu, says Missy, the 32-year-old woman in the costume. It's a giant catfish, and they're generally really dumb looking, and I love them. I thought it would bring a lot of happiness. When I suggest that it's also slightly terrifying, Missy is unfazed. That's a part of their joy.
Writer, did you seriously go into a Final Fantasy XIV festival and ask people if their cosplays are weird? Let me illustrate to you why this is a really stupid question. Imagine you like a video game, for example, Mortal Kombat. Imagine a journalist who doesn't understand about video games at all come into your face and say, hey, isn't the level of violence in this game a bit gratuitous? And that's exactly what happened here. This writer doesn't understand the culture of Final Fantasy XIV, what makes people to like the culture of Final Fantasy XIV, and decided to come into the event thinking, whoa, this looks weird, and I don't understand why these really weird people really like these weird things. I think one of the reasons why journalists are classified to be more insufferable than the gamers is at least gamers know when to leave people alone. Journalists are gonna actively bother people and ruin people's fun and joy with ridiculously awkward questions. And yes, he did ask ridiculously awkward questions. I'll save the best for the last because, oh boy, this person has zero sense of courtesy. If you think that the April Fool's joke dude from Diablo Immortal is being disrespectful, wait until you get a load of this. The article continues with the writer writing about how he doesn't understand the culture, and from his ivory tower he looks down upon these weird and freaky catfish people who cosplay at a fan festival of a pretty popular MMO. It looks so weird for a normie and a cool guy like me. He then comments about how the cosplayer stretches her hand out of her mouth to shake the writer's hands, and the writer feels uneasy as if he just stumbled into the cursed image channel of someone's Discord. And this is where the writer highlights his lack of knowledge once again. The writer said that he attended the Final Fantasy XIV Festival, a convention for the monster killers of the 8-year-old MMO Final Fantasy XIV A Realm Reborn. Wait a second, 8 years old? Final Fantasy XIV A Realm Reborn was a re-release of Final Fantasy XIV. Technically, A Realm Reborn is 5 years old, and it's an entirely different game from Final Fantasy XIV, in that it's not an explosive diarrhea. And here's where the writer throws in his main complaint.
Aside from having an overwhelmingly alliterative name, the Final Fantasy XIV Fan Festival is equal parts adorable nerdery and fetishistic cat ears, a convention of moogles and magic. Cosplayers trot around like foam peacocks, a spiky dragoon, a vampiric elf, a moon goddess.
Oh my god, fetishistic cat ears? Foam peacocks? The way the writer described the cosplayers and the way they behave is incredibly condescending. It's done from an outsider's perspective, aka the normie perspective, and it sounds so utterly disrespectful. Now from the outsider's perspective, you might not get why this description sounds so utterly disrespectful, but even an outsider will find this next paragraph to be completely disrespectful. The article then talks about the game's director and producer Naoki Yoshida, aka Yoshi P. Here's what the writer had to say.
Yoshida is a smiling stage presence with a straightened fringe and fingers coated in metallic rings. The fans know him as Yoshi P, and there's applause between every small declaration he makes. At one point, the crowd starts chanting, Yoshi P! Yoshi P! Yoshi P! until he redirects the praise to the dev team, and the chanting mutates, Dev team! Dev team! Dev team! It's the kind of audience so charged with unbridled fanaticism that it will erupt to cacophonous applause with some nice box art.
Imagine. No, seriously, just imagine. Imagine going to an event, something that you're passionate about, something that you love and has been a part of your life for a long time, and then seeing this jackass who doesn't understand about your hobby talk about your unbridled fanaticism. God forbid someone cheers up towards a figure who is respectable among the community. God forbid someone cheers up when a trailer for a new content pops in. God forbid these people are having a good time. This is not the sort of thing that should have been written in an outsider's perspective. This should have been written by someone who actually knows their stuff, someone who knows about the fandom and is familiar about the game. Instead, we have some hack job talking condescendingly about the fans' unbridled fanaticism. In result, we have this condescending article that even I, as someone who isn't a fan of Final Fantasy XIV, find it incredibly disrespectful. And for the record, this dude got paid by Square Enix for this trip. Next time, pay someone else for the trip, someone who actually knows what they're talking about.
It's a grand show designed to tickle the emotions of exactly the kind of person who is willing to fly to Las Vegas and dress up as a moon goddess, but the bards and conjurers of this virtual land were not always so happy. Some of them remember darker times.
Can you get any more condescending than that? The writer then talks about Final Fantasy XIV and how the game was absolute garbage when it first launched. 3 years later, the game relaunched into Final Fantasy XIV: A Realm Reborn, and people love it. They love it so much that it apparently reached 14 million players, which includes trial accounts and inactive users, but still, 14 million players, that's quite a lot. And since the writer is a normie who doesn't understand anything about the fandom's culture, he's baffled that people are racing chocobos or touching a replica of the game's fast travel crystal. But the real meat of the story comes in the form of brothels. So if you guys don't know, players are running brothels inside Final Fantasy XIV, where you have a bunch of players with scantily clad avatars perform lewd and erotic roleplay to each other. The game doesn't have any features of physical sex, but keyboards and text on screen make anything possible. It's basically a rather incredibly elaborate way of lewd roleplaying that happens in pretty much any internet sphere, but there's nothing wrong with that. It's not my cup of tea, but I'm not gonna bother you for it. But you know who will? Well, I think you already know the answer. So the writer got a chance to ask the developers some question. And what kind of question he asked? Well, he asked if the developers know about these brothels populated by scantily clad cat girls, and the writer went full moral guardian mode. Are you encouraging this behavior? Why are you silent about this? Why are you letting players to host their own brothels inside the game and performing lewd RPs? I am dead freaking serious. Of all the questions that he asked that one. Do you people have any sense of courtesy? It seems to me that being polite is a concept that a lot of journalists cannot grasp these days. And sure enough, it made the entire crowd to be really awkward and people are starting to complain. He wasted like 10 freaking minutes asking Yoshi P about a culture that both individuals don't really understand. The director was completely baffled, and I can't blame him. The writer himself is also completely baffled, which wouldn't surprise me because he displayed nothing but incompetence and stupidity throughout this entire thing.
Says director Yoshida when I asked during this press Q&A. He seemed surprised, but it's hard to believe that creators of the game aren't aware of this most MMO of player behaviors. I just want to know the studio's position on cybersex for Gil. Do they quietly discourage this kind of thing, or are they happy to turn a blind eye to this erotic role-playing?
Why? Like, why? Why are you asking this question, you waste of life? What an inappropriate question to ask the developer. Do you have any sense of courtesy? Do you know what it means to be freaking polite? I love that you said, it's hard to believe the creators of the game aren't aware of this most MMO of player behaviors. Are you suggesting that this is just a normal thing that 90% of MMO players love to do? This is a pretty niche thing from what I've read, the same way lewd roleplay is a pretty niche thing. Not only that you're out of touch with Final Fantasy XIV, but you're also out of touch with MMOs in general. And that's not the best part. The best part is he attempted many times to clarify the question and stretching it even longer, making pretty much everyone uncomfortable for about 10 minutes straight. Is this a game journalist version of Jim Acosta? If this is a 10-minute awkward session that can easily be forgotten, nobody would have minded. But the problem is, this person wrote about a niche fandom from a journalistic outlet in the perspective of someone who doesn't understand anything about the fandom. And thus he wrote it in such a condescending tone. Again, if you don't understand why that's an issue? Imagine asking a journalist to go into a fighting game expo. Then during the Q&A session, the same journalist asks, hey, isn't the level of violence towards women in video games something to be concerned about? These people do not understand the concept of courtesy or the concept of time and space. There is a time and space where we can discuss about violence in video games. This gaming expo is not one of them. And the same thing can be said to this fan festival. It's a fan festival attended by the many fans of Final Fantasy XIV that is straight up ruined by this journalist for about 10 minutes thanks to him asking the stupidest, most inappropriate question. Say what you want about that April Fool's guy from Diablo Immortal. At least he's not asking questions about lewd roleplays from catgirls served in the game's brothels. And of course, the writer went on to chain block everyone on social media for pointing out his general lack of tact in both the article and the behavior at FanFest. I mean, I'm just asking about the cyber sex that is happening in your video game and whether or not it's consensual. There's rape happening inside the video game, and I think you people should know that. To add insult to injury, he referred to the crowds having a good time enjoying the karaoke session as cult-like. Oh no, a bunch of fans are singing along to a music. Just imagine going into a peaceful and fun event where people have a good time, and once they do things in unison, you start to call them cult-like. What a condescending, pretentious jackass.
When I think of Final Fantasy from now on, I'll remember the Namazu. It's big, it's slightly unsettling, and I don't really understand it, but it makes a lot of people smile.
Well, at least we all know that you failed on one thing, making people smile. I mean, my god, this is a perfect example to use as a way to highlight a journalist's distaste towards the fandom, a lack of respect towards the community. If you guys want to know why that Twitter poll got to the way it is, this is an example to that answer.